Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show where I look ahead to the future as well as look at the week that was in politics. So, if you're new, please be sure to like if you like the videos, and if you're a regular, please subscribe so that you get alerts as to when new episodes come out, which come out every Monday. So, President Trump proposed a federal gas tax holiday recently, as you can see on the thumbnail. And we're going to get into some of the consequences of a gas tax holiday and why I think that is a bad idea. So, what is the gas tax? Well, the gas tax is a tax we all pay for indirectly when we go to the gas station for a gallon of gas. There are state, federal, and sometimes local gas taxes. On the federal level, it is 18.4 cents on regular unleaded gasoline, and it is 24.3 cents on a gallon of diesel, and it has not risen since, I believe, 1993. So what does this money pay for? It pays for roads and bridges across the country. And if you remember, President Biden proposed a federal gas tax holiday all the way back in 2022, and that idea basically fell apart and it had no traction, even though Democrats controlled Congress at the time. This time, it seems that Republicans might just go for it and Democrats will as well. And in 2008, Hillary Clinton and John McCain ran on a gas tax holiday, and obviously none of them were elected president. Barack Obama was against it. As with many bipartisan things, this is a bad idea, and you might ask, well, why is it a bad idea? We're saving Americans money at the pump. Well, it pays for roads and bridges, and in the grand scheme of the federal budget, it does not amount to much. It's about $37 billion, and it would bring the national average from about $4.53 to about $4.35. That's it. And consider that it would be a measly savings for us. And if you think about it, if you buy a gallon of gasoline, if you buy 10 gallons, it would save you $1.80, which is or $1.84. It's really not that much, and that would be an enormous cost to the federal government at a time when we are already spending a lot of money. So a gas tax holiday is not a good idea. It was a bad idea when Biden proposed it 4 years ago, and it's a bad idea now. Except this time it has a better chance of passing. Speaking of tough economic times, inflation is now at 3.0. Thank God it's not at 8%. It's at 3.8%, which is the highest since the middle of 2023, and that is primarily because of the war in Iran. Producer prices, however, are up about 6%, which are the costs that producers pay, which means that higher inflation could be coming down the pike. The jobs report a little while ago showed that job growth is solid, and I talked about this last week, but it's not booming. So it is a tough job market out there because our economy is growing, but the job market is not. So why might that be? Well, the economic growth measures the size of our economy, and this is where people on the left will say, particularly on the left, will say, who cares about GDP if it goes to the wealthy? And yes, that is a valid concern. However, if your economy is not growing, then poorer people will never be better off. That's the basic truth. So growing the economy is step number one. Anyway, my hunch is that companies are having workers doing fewer things, and higher inflation has squeezed budgets, which make hiring harder, so they're trying to do it with leaner workforces. And then also, if you think about it, for about a year and a half, between 2021, roughly mid-2021, and mid to late 2022, the labor market was absolutely booming, and a lot of companies spent a lot of money trying to attract new workers, and because wages don't fall, a lot of those companies have been trying to catch up budget-wise and profit-wise. And many people will say, well, what about AI? I don't think AI has been a big factor, at least not yet, because one, it isn't very reliable at the moment, and that might change in the future. But think about it this way. If you are a employee, or if you have an employee who messes something up, you can retrain them or you can get rid of them. If an AI screws up, what are you going to do? You're going to fire them? You're going to replace them? If you replace them with another AI, it's going to have the same problem. And then remember, U.S. immigration has fallen quite dramatically, so we don't really need as many jobs to be created for the U.S. to create a stable employment market. It used to be we would need over 100,000 jobs every month. These days, it could be as low as 20, 30, maybe 40,000. So I think the question is, does inflation, and therefore interest rates, remain higher for longer? And if so, companies will probably be hesitant to hire. If this war ends, energy prices fall, and companies are ready to hire, we could see a labor shortage because the unemployment rate is actually relatively low. It's only 4.3%. And usually the target for employment is about 4%. Unemployment is about 4%. And for a long time, if you think about it, we were at right above 3, which is quite low. And the reason we don't want unemployment to be too low is because that shows that there is not enough workers in the workforce. So I would have expected unemployment at this point to be at least 5 or 6% by now. And in fact, in the UK, Germany, Canada, Italy, and France, it is between 5 and 7%. So we are still at the lower end of our peer economies. So going back to interest rates, the Federal Reserve has had interest rates elevated for over 3 years, almost 4. So it is finally taking its toll, and I think that is a great segue into Kevin Warsh's confirmation last week. He has not been sworn into his new role yet. However, Powell's term did expire on May 15th, which was on Friday last week, and he is the acting chair for now. Warsh hasn't been sworn in. I assume he will be this week. There's no reason to think he wouldn't be. And as for Warsh, he will lead the Federal Reserve into the next decade, into the 2030s. One thing to keep an eye on is if he's going to cut rates, which it seems like he would do. However, he wants the Federal Reserve to also shrink its balance sheet, and in case I lost you, just understand that he wants to withdraw money from the financial system at the same time that he wants to inject money into it. So I'm not exactly sure what the strategy is here. He was confirmed 54-45. Democrat John Fetterman crossed the aisle and voted with Republicans to advance the confirmation. And one of the biggest things that surrounded his confirmation was whether he would be motivated by politics. And thankfully, like a Supreme Court justice, not exactly like it, but like a Supreme Court justice, a federal chairman is somewhat removed from politics. They don't serve for life. They just serve for a 4-year term. But no matter what, Trump will not be the one renewing his chairmanship in 2030. In fact, Biden renewed Trump's appointment in 2022, hence why Powell has been at the job for 8 years. So I think there is some risk here, but the risk is ultimately overblown. Now, soon to be former Chairman Powell will remain on the board until 2028, and Trump will get to replace him as governor. So we could see toward the end of the presidency, right as Trump's power is weakening, some influence over interest rates. But I think by then their party will have moved on. The Senate is the one that ultimately confirms the people who go onto the Federal Reserve. And as I've talked in past episodes, Democrats now have a decent shot at taking control of the Senate this year. And this is to my last topic, well, my second to last topic of the day, which is politics. That's where we go here. Every topic's flowed into the next one. This has been great. And that's probably what you're here for. And as I warned last week, there were 2 Senate incumbents that were at risk of losing their primary, and indeed one of them lost. Senator Bill Cassidy in Louisiana has been defeated in his bid for re-election by a fellow Republican. Final results are not in, but as of this recording, Representative Julia Letlow has 45%, State Treasurer John Fleming has 28%, and Bill Cassidy, U.S. Senator, has 25%. The race is headed to a runoff on June 27th, but Bill Cassidy will not be in it. He is the first U.S. Senator to be denied renomination in their party in 14 years. Since Louisiana is a safe Republican state, he will be succeeded by a Republican, most likely Julia Letlow. Letlow has Trump's endorsement, and she is definitely a MAGA-aligned politician. And while Trump is unpopular nationally, he remains deeply popular with the base, and this is just another example of that deep-rooted popularity. In fact, an Atlas Intel poll, which I link below, has Trump with an 87% approval rating among Republicans, and 83% of Republicans think he's doing an excellent job as president. And funnily enough, in the poll, 0.6% of Democrats thought the same, that he was doing an excellent job as president. So believe it or not, there are Democrats out there who think he's doing a good job, and I'd like to know who they are. Lastly, Trump made a high-profile visit to China this week. It was really surprising because Trump gushed over how pretty China was, which was an about-face from his China hawkishness. And if you remember back in 2015, when he really came onto the scene against China, in many ways Trump was the anti-China, pro-Russia candidate, while Clinton was the anti-Russia, pro-China candidate. And like now, there was still a war in Ukraine, but it wasn't the full-scale invasion that began 4 years ago. So the concern most people had over China. And in fact, in the 2012 debate, Obama said to Mitt Romney that the 1980s were calling back and they wanted their foreign policy. And I really think, if I remember correctly, the anti-China hysteria picked up around in 2017, 2018. It really peaked in 2019, 2020. And since COVID, it has never fully recovered. And this was because there were concerns that China would overtake the U.S. as the world's largest economy. But that has not happened. During the first administration, Trump levied some harsh tariffs on China and sanctions on tech companies. He even began closer ties to Taiwan, which Joe Biden continued in his presidency. For all his flaws, Joe Biden was a strong Taiwan advocate. So people who say that he was pro-China, not necessarily true. Biden was more a strong advocate of Taiwan, as was the Democrats in Congress. Even Nancy Pelosi went to go visit her while she was Speaker. So during the second presidency, Trump levied tariffs of up to 145%, which we talked about last year. They were lowered to about 50%, and since then, they've seemed to go on along pretty well. In a November 2025 National Security Strategy Review, China was not labeled as one of America's most strategic competitors, and instead they focused on Europe. So Trump has done yet another thing that I disapprove of, which is a more friendly relationship with China, and even delayed an aid package to Taiwan. So I'm not pleased with this at all. He has turned our allies against us, and he's turning away from them and toward China and Russia and countries like Venezuela. So I think it's interesting that Trump has focused more on the Western Hemisphere, aka Canada, Greenland, Latin America, and the Eastern Pacific, while isolating Africa, Asia, and Australia, and kind of letting that go to China. So we could very much be returning to a bipolar world where in international relations, remember that was part of my degree, international relations. I don't have a degree in international relations, but that was part of my degree. And a bipolar world is where you have two big superpowers. For a long time, we've had a unipolar world where we have one superpower, and what would be really bad would be a multipolar world where there's more than one superpower. So that might be China, Russia, the United States, Europe, Brazil, India. That would be bad because it's very unstable. So you might think, what actually happened at this meeting? Well, there was no meaningful concessions other than China said they are not going to sell weapons to Iran, which they already agreed to. So I see no further reason to discuss this anymore. So that is all for now. As always, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as a reminder, I'd like to remind people is I wrote a book, and one of the books is about my life. If you want to know more about it, it's behind me. So thank you for tuning in as always, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.